It's a joy to be able to be here and share some thoughts with you all about, I guess, the integration of practice and scholarly work. So the interesting part of this for me is it's actually a lifelong journey. I've been at this a long time in terms of being able to get to this destination of being able to talk through what we're doing and how we're talking about it and our opportunities to work together to make sure we've got this going. So let's make sure I'm here. Good. Okay. So the point of this conversation is really one of talking about experts informing experts. And in the classic form of anybody who's in sales, you always tell them what you're going to tell them, you tell them, then you tell them what you told them, right? Make sure we try to land the message associated with that. So in that, then, I'm going to tell you right now, which I hope that you're going to take away from this conversation with two key topics that we're going to go through. The first of which is that experts exist on both the informing, in informing in both the sender and the receiver side. Yesterday's conversation I thought was enlightening and interesting in the sense that it could have just as easily been a conversation in the boardroom at my company, where we had the professors talking about the students in a frame of a novice and expert model. What I'm going to challenge you with today is that that same student is actually an expert. It's just in a frame of context that we don't understand. The same occurs when we think about the contextual natures of our conversations that occur between vendors and customers, or engineering and sales, or finance and marketing. It's a dynamic that's more interesting if we think about it in the framework of the social networking context of the context of how those people are communicating with each other. Right? The second thing I'm going to talk about is the conceptual schemes help us understand the informing process. And so Brandon was fortunate enough, or I was fortunate enough anyway, to land in the conversation at the MUMA School of Business on this inaugural DBA cohort. And the first class that we had was informing science. Never heard the term before I was in the class, and of course Brandon taught it, and perhaps it's imprinting, but I latched onto that, but I would happen to believe it probably has a lot to do with the fact that we had a very bright man leading the program who happened to help us understand some very topical things that related to the work that we all do. So in that sense, I'm going to talk some more about how that relates. And the agenda in terms of how I'm going to go through this is I'm going to start with the problem statement, and then we're going to move through conceptual schemes to frame the discussion, the research example that I have, generalizations and learning. So where I am right now in the program is I am going to defend my dissertation next month. I've completed all the research, written the paper, it's actually a book, and what I'm talking about is how we optimize sales training. So here's what I observed. So I've been doing this for 30 plus years in industry, go-to-market activities, big companies, iconic brands, Microsoft, General Dynamics. You guys happen to know who General Dynamics is now? Normally people don't know that one, but huge defense contractor. Sprint, Motorola, and then there's now a small billion-dollar company that's called Syniverse Technologies that nobody here has ever heard of. But that's the smallest company I've ever worked for, and a variety of roles around marketing and sales and executive management along the way. And what I saw was that there's this disruption process that occurs, and when you think about what's happening in the marketplace between mobile and cloud, digital technologies or distribution channel changes or social networking or, I think in 2015 Gartner said that every single company would be impacted by the move to digital over the next decade. Probably a decade was too long. It's probably going to be even shorter than that, but what's the next thing behind that? There's always a next thing. That's kind of the key takeaway. And what you see that happens is that there's a change in the environment. There's some symptoms that are observed. Increased selling time, smaller deals, margins get compressed. Management comes to the brilliant conclusion that we need to train the sales teams. So they bring in a consultant. This person, they do some work around that. We decide we're going to train the sales force. We bring everybody in at one time. We train them. We send them back out in the field and expect they're going to behave differently. They don't, right? Our natural assumption in that behavior is that it's a homogeneous organization. When was the last time that you brought 30 people around the world together, this room even, right? And think that everybody is exactly the same, and I should expect to communicate with you exactly the same and get you at the same destination point with the same level of efficiency. It's inane, right? It's just dumb. But yet it is exactly what we've done, and I've watched us do it. I did it myself. I've been on the receiving side. I've been on the decision side. And now I'm kind of sitting here watching this, and it's a little like watching the accident happen, and you can't help but to watch it. And yet you can't stop. It's, it's really a frustrating thing. And the interesting thing in my role right now is that we've yet brought in another senior level manager, a new chief revenue officer. I was already at the company, and so I was in the role of running sales operations. He's brought in his own team, and they're doing the exact same thing that we've watched happen multiple times, and I'm in a position to watch it but not change it. So it's an entertaining, odd, disgusting experience, frankly, as you go through it. So the next result of that is that we end up replacing Salesforce. My personal experience is over 12 to 18 months, you've replaced 80, 90, 100%, 120% of the Salesforce. Replace the entire organization. And when you look at what the costs of that are, there's direct costs in the sense of the hiring and the firing, but if you think of it in a sustainability model, most of those costs are external to the hiring manager, either temporally or departmentally, right? Or within the firm or outside of the firm, right? Healthcare costs are in the society, they're borne by the society. The hiring costs are borne by HR, they're not in the department budget. Or if it's a lost customer, it's actually in the next quarter or the next year that the effect of that lost customer arrives. So it's actually, if you think of it a game theory basis, it's to the sales manager's benefit to fire the person and have the role empty as I'm planning the budget for next year so I have an excuse for why I missed my plan. It's a odd, sick model, but yet it is, in fact, the reality of what we live in today. And so when we go through this model, and this continues itself, and it repeats within companies over and over again. Some companies will figure it out. More or less what my observation is that people end up coming back to the company then, and we've hired the next person, and the company has evolved by that time to such a case that they're able now to be successful. It's not that we trained anyone, it's that we replaced people and we were in a new state when we brought the new people in. So why? What is going on in this model? And I'll give you the example of the other day I was in the room and we were talking about how we were going to get the sales teams to behave differently. And the conversation, the decision was, you know what we're going to do? We're going to have a pitch competition. We'll give the winner $5,000. We'll have everybody record their pitches. There's some great software out there to be able to go do that. We'll tell them what the pitch should be. We'll have everyone record it. We'll have the managers review it. And then at the sales meeting, we'll have everybody come in and we'll show the best one. Yeah, raise my hand. What does that do for the person who isn't the best one? Because I guarantee you the person who's going to win the competition is the one who started at the highest point of fitness to begin, right? They have the least amount of effort to get to. And self-efficacy tells us very clearly that if I don't believe I can win, I won't try. So what does that do for the bottom half of our normal distribution? Nothing. So the model that I often draw, and I did this with a workshop that I'm going to talk about here in a moment with one of the major financial services firms. Think about this as a distribution, right? A normal curve. The goal for a sales organization, or for any organization, I would argue the same for Academy, is what do we do for the bottom half of the curve? If we borrow from Rogers and the hybrid corn analogies and innovation diffusion theory, the bottom half of the curve is, or that plus or minus 1 sigma, right, is the whole game. That top group, right, the innovators and the early adopters are going to adopt regardless of what we do. We can't keep them from being successful. I would argue that in competency-based models, those are the people that are going to love that model regardless of what we do as educators or as informers, right? But likewise, that bottom part, those laggards, the procrastinators, right, take their money. Right? They're going to be there, they're going to sleep through class, we're not going to do anything for them. Hopefully at some point in time they have a life-changing event and they become informed, right? The whole goal as a manager in practice is what do you do with that middle 70, 80% of the marketplace? So my argument would be is that's terrific. So we talked about what we're going to do and we talked about how we're going to do it. We didn't talk about why the person should do it. That is absent in the vast majority of the informing that we talk about, particularly within my domain. And I would argue by extension and generalization, I'll talk about it a little bit more. It's the same problem that we have when we think about it within Academy, we think about it within our relationships, and we don't do it as well within practice. We don't start with the why we're going to do something and then determine the how and the what. We begin with the task and go to the execution. I have a task of teaching this course. How is it going to be measured? It's going to be measured like this. Okay, I'm going to do this. It's going to be Monday, Wednesday, Fridays, 10 to 2:30. Here's my delivery. Here are my learning outcomes. I'm done. But why is it the student is going to engage, or why is it that the salesperson is going to change behavior? Some won't, and we have to accept that. So how do we manage that 80% along the way? Informing Science tells us pretty clearly, and this is from actually the Informing Science textbook, there are these personal biases and filters that are acting on each individual, and I will argue in this conversation that within the framework of the context of the conversation, that person is an expert and that those filters are valid. Right? It's not in my best interest sometimes to adopt. I may not have the resources, I might not have the time, I might not think it's important enough. And so as a result of that, regardless of how I call about those filters, risk and time or visceral or best interests or optimized theory or game, whatever it is, it's not in my best interest, I'm not going to do it. So that why becomes super critical in thinking about how do I move you from your current state of thinking to a receptive state? How do I create that cognitive dissonance to make you believe that it's important? And I go back to this kind of, the 4 stages that we always learned about skill development, right? Unconscious incompetence to, unconscious competence. How do you get that person from ignorant bliss to recognizing a need and a value in the behavior? Right? So, as we continue through that, I would argue that there are some conceptual schemes, and conceptual schemes in this sense, there's actually an analogical thinking model, right? It's an opportunity for us to move from this abstraction that we have and how we think about the world and our theory, and as Heath and Heath will talk about in Cursive Knowledge, this expert novice model, and building on Dr. Stillman's work with the chess. He actually uses the example, or they use the example in the book of the expert chess player looks at the patterns and relationships, the novice chess player looks at positions, X, Y. But Heath and Heath also go forward then and they talk about communication in the manufacturing space where they had experts in the plant and engineers. And the engineers wanted to fix the drawings and the experts in the plant wanted to fix the part. And they argued an expert novice model there. But when you go and look at the actual research from Beckley, her research actually is that it's within the context. They were both experts. I would argue that a production manager, a production engineer, or operator is an expert in their context. The engineer is not an expert on the floor. They're an expert in the abstract world that they operate in and within their context. But likewise, I am just as valid and just as knowledgeable about my domain as the other individual is. And so I think we get into this model a little bit where we move into a world where Kaplan and Nelson talk about it as person blame versus situation blame. We're very quick as people to take credit for our successes and blame others for our failure, right? It's human nature. Social research shows that over and over and over again. But yet at the same time, it's to everyone's benefit except the subject to blame the subject of the research. In sales management, from my standpoint, it's far better for me to say that you can't sell than for me to admit it's because I built a crappy product. Right? If you can't sell it, that's because you're dumb and incompetent and I need to train you, and I'm benevolent because I'm giving you the training. As opposed to me fixing the problem and making it be more interesting, more available, and you make more money. I would argue the same is true for our students. Right? Or in my case, the research that I'm going to talk about here just in a moment, or I shouldn't use research, it wasn't quite that literal. It was a 4-hour workshop where I was able to go in and work with 22 sales managers of a financial services firm and help them think differently about how they trained, coached, and evolved their sales force. Right? So this is the, you're calling in to change your 401k, right? You're retiring or you're moving and they're trying to get you to go to a self-directed IRA or something like this. So it's inbound call sales. This group had 22 managers that were there. The average selling experience for the room was 20 years, most of it at the firm, and 5 years of management experience as a sales manager. You're not going to find a more homogeneous natural experiment to try and look at what's going on in that model. I haven't published it yet, but I did have the opportunity to do some innovation diffusion theory research and some sales type research on that, and guess what? Of course, all 5 states, even at 22 sample size, showed up, from laggards to early adopters around innovation. But yet all very much with a similar training, similar experience set, so kind of consistent with Rogers would say, human nature type of an element associated with it. So if we think about what Dr. Gill has written a great deal about in terms of people operating at a point of localized fitness. So if we think about the world as I'm a victim or I'm experiential in the sense that I'm doing what I'm going to do next because of what I've done in the past. I've optimized my behaviors in that world. So in a sales sense, there is no one that is more motivated by their feedback than what you're going to have in a salesperson. Okay? Incredibly transferable, transparent in terms of how those people interact with the world, right? So, real quickly, here's what the research came from. First level managers, second level managers, and executives in the room all defined the disruptions differently, even though the question that was put in front of them was, what are the disruptions for your sales teams? I guarantee you that for a person who's on the job for the first day, everything's a disruption, right? Answering the phone is a disruption. If you've been in the role for 4 years, presidential elections are not a disruption. They're a business cycle. But most salespeople haven't been in that role for 4 years. So as you go through this, understanding what that disruption means is very different, and you have to walk in their shoes. Right? Another piece of the research that was interesting, and I'll just call this one out, and I think everyone in here who's ever taught would know this one right off the top of their head. So the question that was asked of them of the participants afterwards was, what resonated and what didn't resonate in the presentation that I provided to them? I got exactly the same wording from multiple people of exactly the same topics, right? The pre-work by name was resonated and didn't resonate. The workshop video that showed resonated, didn't resonate. The core concept I was communicating, right? The exact same words were identified by some people as saying really valuable and enlightening and engaging, and some people saying, get rid of that. So what I think we come to the point is it's a complex environment, right? This idea that a homogeneous treatment of teaching everyone the same way for the same material with the same outcome expectations is just pure folly. So the last thing I would say is if we generalize, and I've already talked about this to some degree, is that the sales context for the sales manager, trainer, consultant, they're all operating in a different context. The same would be true in the business world when I'm thinking about how I communicate back and forth across organizations, right? And likewise in the academic world, or in the world of academy, where you have, within my context, I am an expert. Even a student looking at whether or not I need to learn that material, I'm an expert in understanding whether or not I believe that I need to know that. So how we evolve our thinking and what do we do about that, I think becomes interesting. I think as an expert, it's our goal to inform, then here are some ideas that I would say from the research and from the conceptual schemes and from my experience anyway, that we should think about. The first one is why. What is the value? Why does the person want to know this, or why do we think that they should know it? The second one is, I think you have to indict the group. You have to demonstrate an incompetence level for them so they have a belief that they need to know. That could be why do they need to know it, that could be what they need to understand, but they need to do something different. We got to use concrete terms, highly adaptable techniques, and then simplify and relate the concepts, cognitive science. And then the last part of this is that we need to accept that everyone will not believe, and in the end, they're all experts. Okay, that's it.